lecturer of Whitman workers and censoring priests, Ben Shahn's murals for the Bronx Central Post Office. Dr. Linden is a historian of American art, born in New York City and now residing in Claremont, California. She's author of the award-winning book, Ben Shahn's New Deal Murals, Jewish Identity in the American Scene, which was published in 2015. She has served as an essayist for City of Promises, The History of Jews in New York, 1654 to present, which is a 3-series volume that was edited by Deborah Dash Moore and selected for the National Jewish Book Awards Everett Family Foundation Jewish Book of the Award. And she also co-edited with Dr. Anreus and Jonathan Weinberg, The Social and the Real, Political Art of the 1930s in the Americas. She received her undergraduate degree in art history from SUNY Binghamton. She earned her MA in art history at Williams College and worked full-time at the Brooklyn Museum in the education department while pursuing her PhD in art history, in American art history at the City University of New York, the Graduate Center. Her dissertation was on Ben Shahn's New Deal murals, which became the subject of her book and is related to our topic today. So thank you very much.
Thank you, and I really appreciate being brought out here. I got to speak here a couple of years ago. Professor Anreus is like family to me, so he gave me a good excuse to see my big brother. And I love introducing people to the Bronx mural. Also, I went to a big state university, so this year I'm very familiar with the campus and meeting all of you. I tend to speak quickly, and I have no problem if you go like, back it up. And I will ask if I'm speaking too quickly. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So, I actually, is anyone, well, are anyone here senior art history majors? No senior, oh, okay. I started working on Ben Shahn as a senior in college, so it's been a long time. And 2 questions, I worked on the Bronx murals, and 2 questions were what came to mind and I worked on. And I'll just throw them out to you to think about. I know you have to do some reaction papers and stuff. The first question was, and as you'll see, what does it mean when the artwork looks like us, everyday working people? Everything I'd been shown in art history class, I didn't have art and politics when I went to school, was mainly popes, queens, kings, and Rockefellers. So what did it mean to look like the artwork you're looking at? And then the second question was, what did it mean this artwork is in a post office? To not have to go out of your way to go to kind of big, intimidating building like the Metropolitan, but just go to your neighborhood post office and see great works of art. So that started me on my journey, which has lasted a long, long time. But oddly, this is the first time I've gotten to talk about the Bronx murals. So being that my dog is named Bronx, this is very much to my heart. So let's get started. Let me know if you have questions. On the left is an easel painting by an artist named Moses Sawyer, called Artists on the WPA 35, and this is Ben Shahn himself, a photo taken by the Farm Security Administration. I'll be explaining all these terms, and taken in the 30s, so this is about the time when he is painting the mural, showing the mural. We started a little late, I hope I get time for that.
Don't worry.
Okay. So in the early 1930s, I'm going to give you some history background as we go. Because I know we all come at this from different viewpoints, especially philosophy. I'm married to a philosopher, so I know you think very differently. And Professor Anreus' class. So in the early 1930s, President Franklin Roosevelt instituted the New Deal to help the United States recover from the Great Depression. The Works Progress Administration, you can just call this the WPA, was just one of many New Deal programs. There was hundreds of different programs, but the WPA's mission was to create jobs and put unemployed Americans, of which there were millions and millions, put them back to work. Now what's special about the New Deal for Ben Shahn is, under the WPA, the federal government for the first time considered artists to be valuable workers and important contributors to society. So that romantic idea of the artist living alone in a garage and stuff, these guys, such as here, these are all artists on the WPA working collaborative, communally. We can identify these different people. They were considered workers. And this meant they were worthy of a steady paycheck, which was a prized and rare thing in the Great Depression. Among the many, many artists that the government employed was Ben Shahn. Ben Shahn's dates, am I going too fast? Yeah? Oh, that tempts me a little?
They're used to the way I speak, so you're okay.
Okay. Ben Shahn was born in 1898. He died in 1969. He was an Eastern European Jewish immigrant to America. He arrived at Ellis Island at age 8, and his family fled political persecution and what we call bloody pogroms, or attacks against Jews in Russia, in Eastern Europe. They had to get out of there for their lives. Politically, Shahn was a socialist. He was a realist painter. He was a documentary photographer, a talented graphic artist, all of which you can see out in the galleries. And he was highly praised in all these areas, which is quite rare to be good at so many things. And he was a muralist, and he was an excellent muralist. And he was fortunate that the government hired him several times, usually through anonymous competition, to paint murals, permanent wall paintings, such as those he completed in the Bronx. Earlier, the Bronx murals are 38-39. And earlier in the decade, in 33, Shahn assisted the celebrated muralist Diego Rivera. I'm assuming at least the art and politics is a familiar name. Mr. Frida, he was married to Frida Kahlo. That's how we know him nowadays, which Alejandro will not forgive me for. But one of the three great Mexican muralists. We would not have murals in the United States were it not for Diego Rivera. He was hired by the Rockefeller family to paint in Rockefeller Center, and this is an example of the mural. This is Rivera with his back to us, busy with his brushes. Shahn assisted on this mural. He learned the art of true fresco, which is painting with pigment on wet plaster, which is one of the hardest ways to make art. He was one of the few New Deal artists to learn how to make fresco. He also, under Rivera, learned about the ramification of painting politically and socially charged images. As I said, the Rockefellers paid the money for the mural. It was in Rockefeller Center. It displeased them because of political reasons, and they didn't just have him stop, they had the mural destroyed. And as you will soon hear, Shahn's Bronx mural also met with controversy. On the right, so this is the Rivera. On the right is from, am I allowed to move away from that?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Is Queens Post Office. It's on immigration, the rights and importance of immigration, the importance of voting. You'll have to register, remember. Petitioning the courts, working class people. This too met with controversy because he included all the letters of the First Amendment of freedoms that were guaranteed under the First Amendment, and the post office officials felt that that was kind of pushing it. But he won, and he kept the images. Ben Shahn, there's some quotes by him up in the gallery, and I love, he had a lot of great quotes. And my favorite one is, all facts are lies, all stories are true. It's kind of a little twisted, but this afternoon, what I promise you is I'm going to tell you 2 stories, and they're true. Well, they're part of my interpretation, so they could be false, but we'll go with the truth for now. The first story is the one that Ben Shahn intended to tell. Images championing America's workers through murals. The second, and I'll get to this in a bit, you have a photograph of this image out in the galleries. This is Walt Whitman, the American poet. I want to say New Jersey, born in Camden.
Died in Camden.
Died in Camden. Okay. You can still claim him.
We do.
His dates were 1819 to 1892, so a 19th century poet. And the second story is about an unintended controversy. Ben Shahn's mural, which included this image and this poem by Whitman, unintentionally he provoked anger. And the controversy came to such a head that there were calls to censor and stop Ben Shahn, in large measure because of this Whitman picture and poem. The poem is Thou Mother with Thy Equal Brood, 1872. It's humanistic in tone, so it's not praising God, it's praising human beings. And his poem likens the United States to a mother, and the states, individual states, to her children. Okay, so we're going to start first with the mural. This is the submission. He had given a 2-part submission. This was a competition, anonymous competition. Over 200 people submitted applications, and he won. He titled, this is, in actual life, it's a 13-panel mural. And the great thing about seeing murals, they're really powerful. They're like IMAX. They're like big and bold and can make large statements. The lousy thing about working on murals is you can't get good images of them. So everything I'm showing you is a lie, so they omit that. Much smaller than you would see in real life. This is the submission, and it was on 2 walls, and it showed opposite walls, and then the north and south wall. And it showed different laborers and phases of labor, a riveter, an engineer, a man threshing hay, a woman spooling thread, this man working with molten lead, real gorgeous orange and red fiery tones there, a man kind of dangling over an electric dam. This was time when we were, through the government, getting electricity out to more and more places in the United States. This is a thresher machine, and this is a man in a factory working on a loom. And you see all the factories, and his huge loom, and all the threads kind of like spider webs coming out. He titled this The Resources of America. And the resources, when trying to decide on what his subject would be, because there was no given subject, he said that there was no suggestion as what to do, and I, having experienced America myself, I decided those people who are as provincial as only city people can be, in other words, New Yorkers know it all, but they haven't been outside of New York, to show them the best in scope of America. So the resources of America, the best in scope of America, were America's industrial and rural workers, people who labored in the factories and in the fields. And as we see here, we have steel workers, textile workers, cotton, we don't see the cotton picking on this particular panel, a range of labor. The New Deal, the WPA wanted artists to paint the local industry, and Ben Shahn wanted to, he broke with that code and he wanted to show New Yorkers what labor was throughout different, mainly the Midwest and the South. You'll see it a bit in the individual slides, but all of the individual panels of the 13 panels are painted kind of with this golden, tawny color. So the idea was it would unite the murals with the shared colors. It also matches the ceiling fixtures, which is odd. So it gives this all-over tan, which is kind of bringing them together. Any questions? Talking too fast yet? You guys are good. This is a study for a panel that was called Riveter. And this is an African-American man who's working in either the steel or auto industry. He was very selective about what industries he focused on. And he focused on industrial industries such as textiles, automobiles, mining, and steel. These were all represented by the union, the CIO, which had recently been formed. There's also the AFL. AFL-CIO is what we know now. But the AFL was much more conservative. And the CIO, which Shahn actually went on to do posters for, of workers and encouraging people to get out the vote. It was considered more radical. It was more racially and ethnically diverse. It was better for women. And there were committed socialists among its leadership. And I think some things to point out here, you notice how prominent the hands and arms are. He really gives an emphasis on the effort of labor, and that people are hardworking. And I want, as I go through these, whoops, that's not what I expected. These murals, you'll see that people are very engaged with their work and their labor. There are political differences about what you can get away with, what you can paint when you're doing a private easel painting for yourself or for a patron. And the difference between when the patron is the federal government and it's a mural. These are two really important easel paintings. This is American Tragedy, Memorial Day 1937, and you see the cops, the pregnant wife, the worker, they're battling it up. This is based on a real event where the cops and the management, the security guards of the factory shot at and killed some workers who were trying to organize. And on the right, Itero Ishigaki, the bonus march, which shows an African-American man rescuing a white man. They're both without shirts, so their bodies are really emphasized. The artist wants you to see that he can paint musculature. This is based on the bonus march of '32. President Hoover, there have been promises to the veterans of World War I, and come the Great Depression, nothing was happening. And so they set up tent cities called Hoovervilles in Washington, D.C., and they had a protest and it got violent. You can see tanks were turned on them. This like the Capitol building, or to let you know it's in D.C. and official. You will not see anything with this kind of first body exposed. There are no nudes in New Deal art. That's very hard to say. And nothing this outwardly political. So Shahn's politics, he had to do things like paint workers, but paint workers people would know would be with the CIO. That was radical. But he couldn't come straight out and do something like here. Is that clear? Okay. It's a little hard to make out. You get the orange glow. This is called molten steel. The steel kind of glows in the workers' goggles. This is an open pit of fiery ore. He would break up his spaces using architectural elements, like here painting the steel girder factory elements. He learned that from Rivera. Or at least it was encouraged by Rivera. He did some of that beforehand. So here's something for you philosophers to philosophize on, a phrase we use a lot in my house. Shahn is showing us calm but productive workers. He's not showing the fighting in the street, the push to get more labor unions, more jobs. And this is during the 30s. I'm assuming you've all heard of the Great Depression, the massive economic decline of the United States. So there's the Great Depression, but he's doing productive workers. This is a time of incredible racial problems. The rise of lynchings in America, nationally, internationally, the growth of fascism, labor unrest, but he cannot produce that. So he has to, as I said, find a different way. Also going on, and this is 1938 when he does the image, and that's when the United States government, it's in 38 where the government starts accusing people in the federal projects programs of being communists. The first program they went after was the federal theater program. There's a great movie, though it kind of mishmashes the truth and takes different time periods together. It was in part based on a play, but it's called The Cradle Will Rock. And in part, it shows the destruction of Rockefeller Center, which people didn't witness, but your heart like sinks when you watch that. And it also shows the taking apart of the federal theater. These are going around and like they were doing children's theater and theater about news happening in news. Senators said it was just riddled with communists and it was dismantled in 38. And it was the first program to fall to what we call the Red Peril, this witch hunt and paranoia about communists in America and in the government. Ben Shahn, I said, was a leftist, he was a socialist, and artists like Ben Shahn were concerned. They were concerned over their freedom of speech, but more and more they were fearing for their own livelihoods in life. So the contrast is there's all this turmoil going on in real life, and there is productivity and calm in these paintings. Cool? You got it? Okay. See what I mean about how hard it is to get a good slide of a mural? This is a white-collar engineer working on what was called the Tennessee Valley Authority, TVA. It was bringing electricity into the homes of people in Tennessee. And people in Tennessee resisted it because they thought the government was infiltrating their life. It was the first time they were getting electricity. Notice again, like the meaty hands holding the document. And we're going to talk about how his head is down. I'm going to show you in each image. Try to make eye contact with the actual people. And you'll find you can't. And I'll discuss that a bit. This is the counterpart. So that on one side there'd be the engineer, and the other side is this man working at a hydroelectric dam. So we have the rushing water, the new structures, be something like Hoover Dam. And it's very unglamorous. His, butt is to us, his broad back. These caps, so it's indicated they are workers. He's not turning towards us to show up, I'm proud, this is my work. He's too busy working. Any questions? I'm always shocked when people don't have questions because I'm like, this makes sense? It makes sense to me, but this is kind of a more romantic preparatory drawing of a woman working in a textile loom. Again, the enlarged hands. Ben Shahn's very distinct style of using heavy outline for the forms, not just blending the flesh, but shaping and marking the body to hold it and identify body parts. Her eyes downward. She's working by hand. This is the final image, which is the woman in the factory, and all these spools are kind of claustrophobically locking her into place. We notice again her agile, her workers, very capable hands, and again she's absorbed in her work. There are not, when I first started working on some of the new young artists, I would get all pissy and I was like, well, there were women artists and there are images of women, and I'm like, all the women are shown as helpmates to their husband, helping on the farm, and a mother. They were never showed really working. And that's what the government supported, the wife as second to the husband, and that's what the murals and the paintings and the prints all would illustrate. Here she's an industrial worker. There's only one woman in this mural, but yet this is one of only 11 images of women in all of the New Deal murals showing a woman working for a paid job. So it actually is something substantial in terms of what he's showing women doing. Was there a question? Yeah.
Hi, my name is Kay. I'm particularly impressed with the way the woman is depicted as being more or less entrapped in prison. You can't really see all of her.
No, it kind of suppresses, especially her breasts.
No, more than that. From my reading, I know that all these machines were dangerous and could kill you.
Yeah.
If suddenly something happens. And yet she's almost goddess-like in her pose, being calm, focused, concentrated at the same time, extraordinarily trapped. I could see also that she's barely breathing. I'm sensing like she's not really breathing in and out easily. And I was wondering if that was part of Mr. Shahn's intention.
This is part of Shahn's intention to really hold her back in some ways, to show her totally absorbed in her work. I think also kind of suppressing the female parts of her body, so she's not being shown as a wife or a mother or helpmate. I just for myself call this the Madonna of the Mills, because there is this angelic quality to her. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is the male counterpart. Huge mural. Okay, so this is the bench. You get a sense of the scale. It's bigger than this screen. Man's eyes are down, and he's got these big, meaty hands that are plunging into our space and plunging into the loom. Many factories. Was Paterson a factory town?
Yep.
Yeah, oh yeah, okay.
So-
Textile?
Yep.
Okay.
Silk City.
I'm sorry?
Silk City.
Silk City. Oh, I should know that there was the Paterson Silk Worker strike. I'm forgetting my own knowledge.
You should see the Linden Stevens today. There's a Paterson museum and you can walk through.
Yes, sir.
The depiction of the woman, she was caged. Her
Yes.
hands free.
That's right. But he is contained behind this bar, and he has all these strands, which I said are like the spider webs, and he has a greater distance, so there's more space given to him.
Yes.
Greater movement and greater freedom. These two, the woman and the man, were on opposite walls to show you the different stages in producing textiles. This is the Gleaner. So why don't I talk a little about, I made mention to the fact that the backs are to us. This is a man busy in labor. He's got an incredibly broad back. Shahn's figures are not heroicized. They're not larger than life. They're not like all muscles and posing, which a lot of New Deal art is. And they're all, in this particular mural, their backs are towards us. Okay, what would it feel like if this man with the hay and the pitchfork is looking right at you? Is that a comfortable feeling? It's very confrontational. And there was a device that artists would use, put the back towards you, and you could project yourself into the image. Put the face towards you, and you're kind of repelled, and he wanted you to imagine yourself as part of the working life of America and in sympathy and harmony with these factory workers and field workers. His figures are bulky. The clothes don't cling to the body. They're all kind of baggy. They're busy at work. They're too busy to pose, to turn to us. And again, one cool thing about this is when you can see the mural in person, each piece of grain is an individual brush stroke. So you really get a sense of Ben Shahn working his own hands, his own large hands, his own idea of himself as a worker, because his labor shows in these paintings. There's a great deal of individual brush strokes, and you can tell that, he gave it his all. This is the opposite wall, and it's threshing machines. Worker's hat, eyes down, engaged in labor, lousy slide, I'm sorry. Shahn really was not that enamored of images of machines. There are a lot of New Deal artists, and the artist I mentioned, Diego Rivera, the Mexican muralist, loved machines. Shahn was about people. And it's the people doing the work over the machine. It's not the fascination with the shiny big thing. It was different. talk to you a little bit about, yes. There's a question? Hi.
Yeah, the last painting you were talking about, he was all about the people. I believe he did that on purpose because it showed that it's the man and the woman who are actually controlling these machines, not
Right.
the opposite.
Right.
Because back then it was all about, we're it's new construction, machines are it.
Right.
New age, it was all about this.
New
and
industry,
New
new
industry.
building.
And people were not, people who were working in the industry were not seen more as humans. They were, they were the one working these machines.
Right.
It was just the machines are important, not the humans. And no jobs. Right now, we don't have a lot of industrial jobs for
That's
people
right.
who are working. Because we have all these high-tech machines that are being used for us.
Right, or we've sourced it out to other countries.
Exactly. So,
You're right, he's about the human being.
right.
It's not the machine. He wants them to be in a union, he wants them to have good work. But like I said, he's not, let me show you every detail of the machine. The machine is there because it's necessary to tell the story, but it's not the whole story. I mentioned something called the FSA, Farm Security Administration. And Shahn, this is a photograph he took down in Arkansas on a plantation where sharecroppers, cheaply paid labor, barely above the life quality of slaves. They were enslaved to the people who owned this land. I'm getting a nodding from the side, which I love that. So the Farm Security in 1935 and 38 hired him, Shahn, to travel throughout the South and Midwest taking photographs, black and white documentary photographs. And he was not, the FSA was not an art program, it was an agricultural program. It came out of the agricultural section. But they were charged with photographing how bad things were in the hopes they get photos to use as propaganda to get more government funding. So we can see a lot of artistry in his work, but this was meant to convince senators to give money. I want you to focus on this young man who's bending deeply. He's almost just to the corner. Shahn emphasized the hard labor people were doing. There were a lot of white northern photographers for the FSA who kind of sentimentalized or romanticized the scenes of the South or the Midwest. But Shahn's like, this is hard labor. And we can tell people put in a long day because a lot of the bushes are no longer full of pluff. He turned that photograph into a poster for the Farm Security Administration, and he's saying straight out, it's 3 cents an hour or nothing, that's what you get for your labor. But with the resettlement, which is part of the FSA, he can have a life. This is the mural painting. He's taken it and made the man right up to what we call the picture plane, or right to the edge. We don't have to search far in to look and locate him. He's working hard. This is filled with cotton. And it brings to mind a photograph, not a photograph, a poem by the great poet Langston Hughes called Cotton, which I'll read to you. It goes, there stands the white man, boss of the fields, lord of the land and all that it yields. Here bend the black folks, hands to the soil, bosses of nothing, not even their own toil. And he contrasted the man picking cotton, this is called stoop labor, bending way down low, hard at work, with the white men who were not doing that well financially, but they're bundling up the cotton to market. They're closer to the marketplace. They're higher up in the economic standing. Okay, how am I doing in terms of time? 10?
15 minutes.
Okay. Okay, Whitman. This is my second story. So, Walt Whitman was a beloved American poet, still is, and Ben Shahn decides to include him as kind of the spiritual foundation, because he did a lot of poetry about the rhythm of the workers of America, the laborers, the everyday life of America. And so he included a portrait of Whitman in the poem I pointed out, and he's shown here. He looks a little like Moses and Karl Marx combined. His poem written out, and these are contemporary workers, so he's speaking to them throughout the ages and generations. All right, there were an Irish Catholic priest in the Bronx, but he had a parish in Brooklyn who objected because Whitman was considered a controversial artist. He was on what was called the Index of Forbidden Books by the church. Shahn had to put this image on display in the post office. It was one of the requirements, and this priest just hit the roof. And he gave a sermon out in Brooklyn to over 1,000 parishioners at the Church of Our Lady of Angels. And with great alarm, he asked, exactly the question is there government propaganda for irreligion? And he immediately said that, yes, there was. And this is the proof of it. He didn't recognize the poet, the artist, or the poem. To him, it was saying that, I'm quoting, the wording is an insult to all religious men and to Christianity. It indulges in propaganda for irreligion. As such, the mural should never be executed. And he said this for the parishioners. There's a huge outcry. There are letters to the post office, to federal officials, all saying, this has to come down, this has to be stopped. There were also letters written by people who supported Shahn, supported free speech like Whitman, and did not think this was anti-religion. So there's this big controversy, and Shahn says to the newspapers, this got in the newspapers, with democracy rather on its mettle these days, it gives one quite a shock to hear the word verboten against a traditional American poet. Verboten is German. It means forbidden. And he had just done a mural in New Jersey, in a town now called Roosevelt, and you see the word verboten. This is the only image of a Nazi in a New Deal mural. Ben Shahn, in this case, was able to get political. He's linking, in his response to the Bronx outcry, he's linking this word verboten, the censorship of books that's happening in America, the burning of books that's happening in Germany, and he's bringing them all together saying, we're in deep trouble if we're starting to censor Walt Whitman. There was, it's not as well talked about, there was a strong Nazi presence in New York. This is 1939, a couple of months after he painted and finished his mural. This is a pro-Nazi, it was called like pro-America, but it was actually pro-Nazi rally in Madison Square Garden. And the Nazi Party was strong in America. Now, I don't want to say like it was overextended, but there was a presence in America. And it was spread in part by a man named Father Coughlin, who was from the Midwest, who is very anti-immigrant. particularly anti-Jewish. This is the time Jews are trying to get into America, but being turned away. They're trying to get out of Europe. Shahn fought back. And this is his drawing of Coughlin. You can see the anger and his use of line to express this. Shahn fought back, but he decided to change the mural's quote to a different Whitman one. And you can decide yourself, did he cave or did he just try to save the commission? He was able to do the rest of the mural as he wanted to. He made an easel painting poking fun at the church. This little sign said, "Is the government promoting propaganda in art?" So he tried to get a little statement back, kind of a push back. Ben, he was picking his battles. Ben Shahn once remarked that, quote, "I like doing murals because more people see them than they do easel pictures." So I told you 2 stories, and I'm going to just tell you a third as a closure. Shahn was himself quite a storyteller, and one of his favorites was that he went back to the Bronx years after the murals were completed, and he saw a man in overalls working there and said, "Do you like the murals?" And the guy said, "Well, actually, no. But I'm glad they're up there because I'm organizing the union, and these murals of these men and women on the walls made the workers in the post office feel they were important." And for Ben Shahn, who was pro-labor his whole life and pro-worker, that's like as good as praise as you can get. Sadly, the Bronx post office is no longer functioning as a post office. They almost destroyed the building. It's been saved. And if any one of you is inclined to the romantic mood, this is the final version with a different poem, Whitman, and 2 workers on either end. Very bold statement. You can have your wedding at the Bronx post office now. So among the people, the threshers, the machines, the loom workers, everyone struggling, you can have your Princess Day, which is, I think, a very odd outcome for Ben Shahn for this story. Thank you, and let's turn the lights, and I'd love questions or clarifications. And if you got to split, you got to split. So.
Yeah, I'm sorry, some of the students had to leave.
Yeah, it's okay.
Last time.
Yes.
All of these all of them.
All Ben Shahn's murals for the Bronx, yes. 38, 39, the winter. Yes.
I know like
Wait, I can't hear you.
I know like the last when it comes to like the murals went out, whereas there I mean, like push back only people who are like a few times. It's like when these got split.
There was just so far you could go.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
They would send out kind of these thick instructions, and one of the most popular call for murals would be the history of the canal in that area. And Ben Shahn tried to do something on the importance of immigration. He didn't get that mural commission. So there was just so much you can do because this is paid for by the government, and it was supposed to make people feel good and unite during hard times. Yes?
That Nazi
Rally?
rally at the Garden was promoted on flyers as America First.
Yes.
Which is the first document that like that slang, that like slogan was used.
Oh, thank you.
And then Henry Ford later
Oh, Henry Ford was
used it as well.
Yeah. We're all taught, I was taught, Henry Ford made automobiles, and he got them, on factory lines and faster and stuff, and he was anti-immigrant, anti-African American,
Anti-Semitic.
Just anti-everything.
Funded Adolf Hitler's socialist paper.
That's right. Got an award from him.
Yeah. He's,
Got an Iron Cross.
yeah, he's the only American name dropped in Mein Kampf.
Oh my God, yeah. But they don't teach us that. They didn't teach me that in elementary school. I don't know, we just, I'm like, why do we have to learn about him if we're gonna just learn half truths? Yes.
First of all, thank you for the presentation.
You're welcome.
I'm actually a journalism student, so I don't know a thing about art.
Okay, well now you learn a little bit.
Yeah, but I just wanted to ask, obviously his Shahn's work relates to like humanity,
Yes.
and each picture speaks a story. But do you know if there's any other art that you would say isn't as serious, or is all of his art like this? I'm just curious.
He did, I'm not sure if I'm getting your question right, but in most of his public work, he was an intense man.
Right.
And I'm talking about his works the late 20s, 30s, and early 40s. His work changed somewhat stylistically after World War II. But he was an artist, I'd say, with a mission. He was never about painting just to make it pretty or art for art's sake. He really wanted to communicate and had an intensity of commitment and worked for labor unions and made posters against the atom bomb. Yes.
Paraphrasing, I think over in the exhibit,
Yeah.
there was something on the wall where he said about you should live your art.
Yeah.
That's what he was doing.
That's what he did. He was very true to himself. Someone had, yes.
Do we have time? I have like two quick questions.
Sure.
First one, I was just, maybe to touch on it again. Why was the Walt Whitman piece so controversial? Because I like Walt Whitman.
Yeah.
His work is very altruistic and positive in nature. So what was exactly the controversy?
This particular priest and what he was stirring up in this particular parish it wasn't poetry praising God.
Okay.
It was praising human beings.
Right.
And to do that, put humans before God.
Okay.
There's also something, I think it's still in existence. I had a very uncomfortable phone conversation once with a nun about this. But there was something, may still exist, called the Catholic Index of Banned Books, and Whitman was considered controversial. Alejandro may know better.
It actually ceased to be in existence
Oh, good.
after Vatican II, but the history of that goes all the way back, of course.
Right.
And I just have one more.
Yeah.
I forgot because in your slide, I know from watching a lot of documentaries that a lot of the Nazi ideology
Yeah.
came to the United States. Do you know if any of Ben Shahn's work was considered, because I know Hitler had a lot of work that he thought was degenerate or
Oh, right.
destroyed. So
Yeah.
do you know if any of Ben Shahn's work, because he's working in the United States and they had that in there, was any of his artwork destroyed, do you know?
Not that I know
I
of.
don't know about
He
that.
changed some things in some murals, but, I think we came close to it, and we keep coming close to it with these big censorships going on about the art, but nothing of his was ever labeled degenerate and burned.
That's good.
Yeah, so we never went that far, but we would go as far as not give a commission to someone.
Right, okay.
That's how the censorship worked. Any more questions? Alejandro has a
The
question.
last question, to keep everybody on time. How significant was his Jewish identity in his worldview as an artist?
Why I wrote a book on that.
You paid me to ask this question.
He was an immigrant. He came to America when he was 8 years old. His family was impoverished. They escaped for their lives. His Jewishness was being an immigrant, being political, being working class. It was not a religious sensibility. He's more likely to go to a labor meeting than to go to synagogue. But it definitely, feeling like and being an outsider in America, and at points under threat in America, made him empathetic with other marginalized groups. So it was also a tool or vessel by which he connected with others who were not like Henry Ford.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.